The snow fell like ash, slow and soundless, burying every trail of regret beneath white silence. Wind slid through the canyon walls like a whisper too ashamed to speak aloud, and somewhere beneath a ledge of stone and frozen pine, a 19-year-old girl sat wrapped in a buffalo hide that had once belonged to her mother. Her name was Lila Whitebird. She did not cry. She had already done that the night before, in the hut where no one would meet her eyes. They had left her this morning. Her aunt, her cousin Ruthie, the old chief who could not look her in the face. No wailing songs, no blessings. Just the soft crunch of their moccasins as they walked away from her forever. The tribe had many words for what she was now. Cursed. Fruitless. Spirit drained. Useless. Her womb had not bled the way other women's did. She'd married at 16, but no child had come. 2 seasons passed, then 3. Her husband's family called her stone-bellied behind closed hides. By the 4th season, he'd taken another. By the 5th, her name had become a burden. Her cousin Ruthie birthed her 3rd son by then. Lila had not even a cradle. Snowflakes landed on her lashes as she stared at the orange flicker of a dying fire. No wood left. No meat. Just a dry hide and an empty pouch of berries. The canyon around her stretched wide and hollow, echoing with wind and the groans of ice breaking along the rock face. It was the kind of place meant to erase people. And maybe that was what they wanted. For the mountain to swallow her bones, for no memory of her to remain, no shame to pass on. She did not move. Moving meant hope, and she had laid that down when she watched her people disappear over the ridge. She didn't see the rider at first. Just heard the sharp crunch of hooves on frost. Slow. Purposeful. Not like a man hunting, or hurrying, or fleeing. But like one who had seen death before, and did not fear what lay in the snow. He was tall, that much she saw through frost-glazed lashes. A thick fur cloak covered his shoulders, draped over the dark leather of his war shirt. His skin was the deep tone of earth after rain, and he bore no painted mark but carried a bow longer than her arm and a quiet in his face that made her feel like she'd already spoken, even though she hadn't said a word. He dismounted without hurry. No words. No questions. Just looked at her like a tree might look at a wind-blown feather. Something small and out of place, but not meaningless. She tried to lift her eyes fully, to find threat or mercy in his face. But he did not glare. Nor gawk. His gaze was a calm lake. Still. Seeing. Her lips cracked when she tried to speak. No sound came. She turned her face away. The man kneeled. Lifted a corner of the buffalo hide and tucked it tighter around her. Then without ceremony, he pulled his own cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around her too. His hands were rough but warm. His fingers brushed her arm only long enough to check for frostbite. She shivered, not from cold, but from the unfamiliar weight of kindness. He said only one thing. His voice was low, the kind that came from the chest and not the throat. You don't belong here. She couldn't answer. Didn't trust herself not to weep. He lifted her gently, like she was made of breath and not burden. She expected to be thrown over a horse like game. But instead he carried her in his arms, pressed to his chest, her cheek against the warm drum of his heartbeat. A rhythm steady as snowfall. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the smoke trail of her little fire, curling like a spirit being carried upward. Like the end of something. She woke to warmth. Thick blankets. A fire that didn't struggle to stay alive. A smell of smoked meat. And walls. Wooden ones. A cabin. Not a tribal hut. A white man's build, but filled with native hands. Every tool and bundle placed with care. A carved pipe on the shelf. Woven mats on the wall. Her mother's people had whispered stories about cabins like these. Lone shelters kept by warriors who left their tribes for the cold highlands. Her breath caught. Her hand flew to her chest. The buffalo hide was gone. Replaced with soft deerskin. Clean. She sat up. The movement made her dizzy. Then she saw him. Seated at the far end, sharpening a blade. Still. Like stone. He didn't look at her. He had given her warmth. But not ownership. He had fed her, but kept distance. She was not a prisoner. Nor was she home. When she cleared her throat, he nodded once, not turning. "Eat," he said. "Then sleep." His Comanche accent was thick but not harsh, like words dipped in firelight. She obeyed. For days the pattern stayed. He left meat. She ate in silence. He slept outside in the lean-to barn. Snow fell. Time thickened. Shame, however, lingered, thin and sharp. She stitched a torn blanket one day, her hands shaking. He returned and paused at the sight, then nodded. Approval, perhaps. Maybe surprise. Only once did he offer explanation. She had asked his name. He had said simply, "Towhan Black Elk." And hers? He had already known. "You're Lila. Whitebird. Left in the canyon, like a broken drum." The words should have stung. But his voice carried no mockery. Only memory. As if he, too, had been left behind once. Each day, the snow grew deeper. Each day, her silence thinned. She learned his rhythms. How he chopped wood with the same stroke each time. How he warmed his hands before touching anything metal. How he did not speak unless something needed to be said. One morning, she dared to place a bowl of broth by the door before he returned. That night, he left her not just meat, but tea. He began fixing the roof while she swept the floor. Their movements a language. Unspoken, but slowly fluent. Still, she dared not ask why. Why had he taken her in? Why risk shame for a girl like her? Until one night, she saw something beneath his cot, a carved cradleboard. Dusty. And used. Her throat closed. Her heart thudded like hooves in her ribs. That night he returned early, saw her staring at it. His eyes narrowed. "It's old," he said. "For a son I never had. Or maybe for a woman I never found." He didn't elaborate. Just moved it to a shelf and went to light the fire. She wanted to tell him she was barren. That she had no use for cradleboards. That she had nothing but stitched hands and quiet eyes. But she stayed silent. Because maybe he already knew. The next morning, snow had blown across the door, burying their steps. She stared at it for a long time. There was no going back to the tribe. But maybe, just maybe, there didn't need to be. And when she swept the hearth clean, she looked over her shoulder, and found Towhan watching her. Not with pity, but with something steadier. Like a man seeing not what a woman lacked, but what she still carried. And for the first time, she felt warmer than the fire. Even if she said nothing. Yet. She didn't need to. Not yet. The snow would melt in time. So would she. The days folded into one another like pages of an unread book. Quiet, steady, heavy with what went unsaid. Lila learned the shape of Towhan Black Elk's life not through stories but through sound. The creak of the cabin door before dawn, the rhythmic thud of axe into pine, the rasp of blade over fur as he skinned his catch by lamplight. His words, when they came, were spare as flint. But in his silence, there was no cruelty. Only restraint. As though words were a currency too precious to spend on anything less than sacred. He was a man built like a mountain, with shoulders broad enough to carry winters and sorrows alike. His presence filled the space around her, even when he was gone. She felt it in the quiet discipline of his cabin, in the way no tool was misplaced, no fire allowed to die. He lived like a man who had lost much and would not risk losing more. Lila kept to her corner of the room, where a cot and a wool blanket waited each night. She stitched when her hands allowed, cooked small meals when the stores permitted. She never asked questions, but she listened. To the wind moaning across the roof, to the wolves calling from beyond the hills, to the beat of her own heart, steadying itself slowly each day. One afternoon, a blizzard rolled in with such force the windows rattled and the fire spat in protest. Towhan returned soaked, a deer slung across his back and snow clinging to his braids. He spoke only once as he laid the carcass down. 3-day storm, maybe 4. We'll ration. She nodded. He stripped off his coat, hung it near the fire, and crouched beside the animal. She turned away, not from the blood, but from the way his hands moved. Steady, practiced, reverent. That night, he didn't sleep outside. The wind was too cruel. Instead, he sat by the fire sharpening a bone needle, his eyes cast downward. Lila wrapped herself in her blanket and lay facing the wall, pretending not to notice his presence, pretending it didn't make her feel safer than she had in years. When sleep came, it brought dreams. Of laughter she had forgotten, of warmth that wasn't fire. She woke at dawn to find the blizzard still raging, and Tohan gone from the chair. But her blanket was heavier. He had laid his coat over her in the night. She folded it neatly, left it on the chair. No words. On the third day, food ran low. Tohan handed her a strip of dried meat, the last of it, and poured her the better half of the tea. She stared at the cup, then at him. "You first," she said, voice cracking from disuse. He blinked, as if surprised she could speak. But he obeyed, biting the meat and nodding once. In the hours that followed, she carved a wooden spoon from scrap, just to keep her hands busy. When she finished, she left it beside his bowl. That evening, he used it without comment. The snow stopped on the fourth day. The sun returned, pale and cautious. Tohan opened the door, shoveled a path with heavy strokes. Lila stepped outside behind him for the first time in days. The light stung her eyes, but the air was clean, like forgiveness. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. At dusk, he saddled his horse. "Going to town." 2 days. She stiffened. "You'll leave me alone?" He studied her face. Not to intimidate, but to understand. "Safer in here than with men in town," he said. "Lock the door. Take the rifle. Shoot only to warn." She hesitated. "I've never held a rifle." "Hold it like truth," he said. "Don't let it shake." And then he left, riding into the icy dusk like a man born of shadows. She locked the door. The cabin felt emptier without him than it ever had with him in silence. She missed the rhythm of his movements, the warmth of his presence, the calm that came from being beside someone who expected nothing from her except honesty of spirit. She used the time to clean every shelf, mend every blanket. She found the cradleboard again. Still untouched, still carved with care and sorrow. She brushed the dust from it and left it uncovered, as if to say, "This is part of the house now. No longer buried. No longer shame." On the second morning, he returned with flour, salt, beans, and a bloodied lip. Lila rushed forward but stopped short. "Who did that?" He tossed a sack onto the table. "Drunks. Said things about you." She bit her lip. "Why not walk away?" His eyes darkened. "Because I didn't." She washed his wound with care that night. Her fingers trembled when they touched his cheek. "I'm not yours to protect," she whispered. He stared into the fire. "You are not anyone's to harm." Silence hung between them. Heavy. Sacred. Later, she found a sack of beads among the supplies. Simple, blue and red. For trade. But that night, she began to sew them into a strip of deerskin anyway, her fingers finding patterns without thought. The repetition soothed her. Anchored her. She made 2 strips before she slept. The next day, he fixed the roof while she baked flatbread. When he sat to eat, she set the sewn beads beside his plate. He lifted them gently, running his callous thumb across the pattern. Then he tucked them into his pocket. No words. Just that. The snow melted slowly that week. Lila hung clothes outside. She saw the tracks of deer near the trees. She breathed deeper. Then came the town's whispers. Tohan had returned from town with more than goods. He'd returned with news. "Dusty Boone says they call you the Barren Bride," he muttered one evening, chopping wood. Lila froze. "And you?" she asked, voice barely above wind. "I call you Lila," he said, and split another log with one clean blow. That night, he didn't return to the barn. Instead, he brought in fresh pelts, laid them by the fire, and slept there, his back to her. Not touching, but present. Guarding. She couldn't sleep. She turned over, watching the back of his shoulders rise and fall. "I was cast out," she whispered. "Not because I chose to be childless, but because I tried and failed." He said nothing. "I did everything. Herbs. Prayers. I even let the medicine woman cut me and bury the blood in the river." Still nothing. She turned back to face the wall. And then, just before dawn, she heard him say, Some things break. Others were never built for what they're blamed for. She did not understand it fully, but it rested inside her like warmth. 2 days later, she caught him watching her as she bent to sweep the hearth. "What?" she asked. He shrugged. "You don't tremble when you touch heat anymore." She blinked. "I didn't know I ever did." He nodded once. "You did." The next time he went to town, he came back with cinnamon and a handful of colored thread. She did not ask why, but she sewed him a band for his knife handle. Blue and red, the colors of snowfall and blood. When she handed it to him, he looked her in the eyes for the first time. Not past her, not through her, but truly at her. "I'm still broken," she said softly. Tohan gripped the band like it held the last truth in the world. "So am I," he replied. That night, when the fire burned low and the wind slept, he lay on the floor beside her cot, his breath even, his body still. She reached down and rested her hand over his. He did not flinch. And for the first time, she dreamed of warmth that might stay. The thaw came not all at once, but in moments. A drop from the eaves. The soft moan of ice slipping from the roof. The first bird call after a long silence. And in Lila, something was melting too. Something old and bruised, hidden beneath the years of being looked through and left behind. She rose before the fire some mornings now, not because duty demanded it, but because she wanted to. She moved with quiet purpose, braiding kindling, stirring porridge, folding the woolen blankets that Tohan never quite folded himself. He let her. Never once corrected. His respect came not in words, but in absence of intrusion. The world outside began to stir. The snow parted at the feet of trees, exposing the wet brown earth below like an old secret finally exhaled. Deer tracks returned to the edges of the woods. Birds made quick work of silence. The season was changing, and so was the space between them. Tohan never asked her to join him in the woods. But one morning, he turned as he opened the door and simply waited. She understood. They moved through the forest with a rhythm both natural and earned. He led with certainty, but slowed so her steps could catch. He pointed to broken branches, distant shadows, paw prints near water. She nodded, storing each gesture like a stone in her pocket. At the ridge, they paused to drink from a creek where the ice had finally split open. Lila cupped water in her hands, cold and sweet. When she looked up, Tohan was watching her. "What?" she said, smiling without meaning to. His expression barely shifted. But in the way his eyes warmed, she felt something more intimate than any kiss. Approval. Reverence. Quiet joy. The next day, she brought him hot tea as he sharpened his knife near the door. She handed the tin mug to him and lingered, sitting beside him on the wood step, the sun brushing both their faces. He took a sip. "Your hands don't shake anymore." She blinked. "Did they?" He nodded. "Like branches in early frost." She looked down at her fingers. "I never noticed." "I did," he said. Then drank again. The silence that followed was not awkward. It breathed around them, familiar and soft. Two people no longer surviving beside one another, but living, quietly, together. But the world outside their small home had not softened. It had teeth. And rumor. And a sharp tongue eager to chew the bones of anyone who didn't follow its ways. It arrived in the form of a young woman. Her name was Willa, daughter of a white trapper, and known for her fast eyes and faster mouth. She brought salted pork and a tin of coffee beans to trade, her lips pink with cold and her cheeks full of curiosity. Lila answered the knock. Willa's gaze ran over her in a quick sweep, from her braided hair to the leather dress she wore, to the hand resting on the edge of the door. "You're her," Willa said, as if confirming a ghost. "The girl from the canyon. The one whose womb's as dry as old wood." The words didn't strike Lila like fire. Not anymore. They drifted past her, like wind that had once frozen her to the bone, but now simply passed. Still, her face betrayed nothing. "To trade." Willa smiled, thin and sharp. "You're brave to show your face. Most women would have wandered off a cliff by now. Or let the wolves take them." Behind her, Tohan stepped out of the cabin. Silent. bare-armed despite the wind. Willa faltered. I meant no offense. His stare didn't change. Then leave no more. Willa dropped the goods and left. Her footsteps vanished quickly into the snow-melted mud. That night, Tohan said nothing. But he built the fire higher, laid his blanket beside hers, and stayed there until morning. No contact. Just presence. Lila, staring at the ceiling in the half-dark, whispered, "You don't need to protect me from words." Tohan replied without opening his eyes. Words shape the world. Better to carve than be carved. Days passed. Then weeks. The warmth crept in, not just in the weather, but between them. One morning, Lila woke to find a white doeskin dress laid out on her cot. Handmade. Sewn with turquoise thread at the collar. The kind of dress worn not for survival, but for ceremony. She held it to her chest, breath caught. Tohan was outside, chopping wood. She stood at the doorway for a long while before stepping down into the dirt. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded once. "Why?" He leaned on the axe. "Because you've stopped hiding." She opened her mouth, closed it, then smiled, small and trembling. She wore it that night, not for him, not to please, but to stand, to feel. They ate beside the fire. He did not comment on the dress, only passed her more food and made space closer to him. Later, as she mended the corner of a blanket, a knock came at the door. Unexpected. Firm. She rose, heart stiff with unease. It was her cousin, Ruthie Bluebird. Behind her stood two children, one a babe on her back, the other clinging to her dress with tear-streaked cheeks. Ruthie looked thin, her lips dry, her hair tangled. But her eyes held the same disdain they always had. "I was told you lived," Ruthie said. Lila nodded slowly. "I do." Ruthie's gaze swept past her to Tohan seated inside. "You took in a broken woman warrior? Or just needed a warm bed and didn't mind it empty of sons?" Lila flinched. But Tohan rose. "She is my wife," he said. "Quiet. Steady. Speak careful." Ruthie stared at him, then back at Lila. "I have nowhere to go." The child's father ran. "We have no meat. No fire." Lila's silence lasted long. Long enough for Tohan to glance toward her. Then she stepped back, opened the door wider. "Come in." Ruthie's expression twitched. Perhaps surprise. Perhaps resentment. That night, the children ate hungrily while Ruthie sat in bitter silence. Lila offered her half of the last sweet root. Ruthie took it with downcast eyes. Later, Lila rocked the baby by the fire. Her hands knew what to do, even if her body had never borne one. The child stared up at her with wide, trusting eyes. No knowledge of wombs or worth or shame. Only warmth. Tohan sat nearby, watching. "She's a good mother," he said softly. Lila looked up. "Ruthie?" "No," he said. "You." She blinked, stunned. "I can't give you what the world says makes a woman," she whispered. He shook his head. "You already did." That night, she wept for the first time in months, not from shame but release. And when he moved beside her, she didn't flinch. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. He lifted her hand, calloused and work-worn, and pressed it to his chest. His heartbeat was slow. Strong. Steady. That was enough. For now. The fire cracked beside them, casting gold against the walls of the cabin, where shame had no place left to dwell. The snow was nearly gone now, pulled back like an old sheet to reveal mud, roots, and memory. The cold still whispered in the wind, but the cabin no longer felt like a place of waiting. It had become a place of becoming. Lila moved with quiet certainty now, as if her presence no longer required apology. Her hands stirred stew, her fingers brushed beads, her gaze lingered on the fire with more thought than fear. The baby she rocked, Ruthie's little one, slept easiest in her arms. The older child, a boy no more than 5, followed her like a shadow. Called her Aunt Lila, in a voice still hoarse from hunger, not yet from sorrow. "And Ruthie?" Ruthie watched. From the side of the room. From behind bitten lips. She didn't offer thanks, but she didn't leave either. The cabin pulsed with tension, the kind that grows when two women know too much of each other's pain and still cannot speak of it. Their histories tangled like roots in shallow soil, one mothered without stability, the other steady without children. One evening, as wind stirred the trees outside and dusk slinked across the floor, Ruthie muttered, "He built you a home for nothing." Lila kept stirring the stew. Ruthie went on, "You can feed someone else's babe, sure. But what about his? He's a warrior, Lila. What man like that ties himself to a dry branch?" Tohan entered at that moment, silent as always. But Ruthie saw him. She didn't lower her voice. "You hear me?" she said, bold now. "Your woman can't carry blood. You could have had a dozen sons by now with anyone else. And you chose this?" Tohan didn't move. Didn't shout. He walked to the fire. Sat beside Lila. Then, in a voice that filled the room like thunder behind the hills, he said, "I didn't choose to breed. I chose her." Lila froze. So did Ruthie. The boy blinked up from his wooden toy. Tohan's gaze didn't leave the flames. "She keeps the fire lit. She listens. She sees the world and doesn't try to name everything wrong with it. She carries more in silence than most men carry in their whole damn lives." He looked up at Ruthie then. "You're right. She won't give me sons." He reached over, placed his large hand over Lila's. "She gave me peace." The room went still. No one breathed. Ruthie rose without another word, gathered her children, and left into the night. Lila didn't stop her. She knew Ruthie wasn't walking away in shame. She was walking away in realization. She would survive. Just not here. The next morning, the cradleboard was gone from the shelf. In its place was a bundle of cloth, a white doeskin dress, soft as memory, with turquoise beads sewn around the collar and sleeves. Lila held it close. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was made by him. She stepped outside and found Tohan splitting logs near the barn. The light behind him painted his skin with gold and shadow. She walked up slowly, held out the dress. "You were saving this," she said. He didn't turn. "I was." "For what?" He drove the axe down one last time and set it aside. "For when you stopped surviving and started living." She swallowed hard. "That's today." Tohan turned to her then. Not smiling, but his gaze held the weight of decision. "Yes." That night, she wore the dress. Not to prove anything. Not to earn anything. But to honor what had already grown between them like moss between stones. Quiet, rooted, unspoken. He stood when she entered, his expression unreadable. But his eyes said everything. She sat by the fire. He joined her. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a simple silver ring. Not polished. Not perfect. But shaped by his hand. "I carved the cradleboard," he said, "when I thought I'd need a woman to give me sons." Lila's breath caught. "I didn't know what I needed," he continued. "Was a woman who'd give me quiet mornings, eyes that never lied, a fire that didn't ask for more wood every hour to keep burning." He held out the ring. "I never asked you," he said, "because I wanted you to choose." Lila stared at it. Her throat ached. Her fingers trembled. She took the ring and slid it on herself. "I chose you the moment you carried me out of the canyon," she whispered. And then for the first time he kissed her. Not her lips, not her neck, but the inside of her wrist, where her pulse lived. It was not passion. It was vow. That night, they lay under the same blanket. He didn't press. She didn't pull. Their bodies knew what their hearts had long accepted. They were not lacking. They were whole. Later, she traced the line of the scar across his chest, and he closed his eyes. "What hurt you?" she asked. "War," he said. "And what healed you?" He turned his head and looked at her. "You." The wind howled outside, but it could not enter. The fire inside the cabin crackled softly, and within Lila, something long buried and cold flared to life. It had no name, but it was hers, and it refused to die. The mountains had shed their snow now, though some clung in shadows like forgotten grief. Spring crept in through thawed creeks and soft rains, pulling life from the ground with every tender breath. But the world beyond the woods had not forgotten Lila Whitebird, nor what they said she lacked. It was market day in the valley town of Gallows Bend, the first since snow receded, and the paths down the ridge were passable. Traders gathered, wagons creaked, and gossip moved faster than wind between saloons and church porches. Towhand stood at the threshold of the cabin, saddling his horse. His frame filled the doorway like a carved pillar, immovable, scarred, and solemn. Lila adjusted the strap of her leather satchel, and joined him without needing to be asked. "You ready?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She didn't nod, just mounted behind him. The ride down was quiet. A fox darted across the trail. Hawks circled. Her hands around his waist didn't tremble anymore. When they reached town, all eyes turned. Some looked too long. Some whispered without hiding their mouths. Others only stared, confusion knotting their brows as they saw a woman they'd all expected to vanish walk calmly beside a Comanche man like she belonged to herself. They set up a modest trading stall, beadwork, leather thongs, 2 cloaks stitched by Lila's hand. Towhand stood a step behind her, arms folded. He didn't speak unless spoken to. The first customer was a preacher's wife. She touched the beading on one shawl. "Pretty work," she murmured. Then, more sharply, "Did your mother teach you?" Lila met her eyes. "No. I learned after she died. I had to." The woman blinked, cleared her throat, and moved on. The second was a grizzled trapper with pale eyes. "You the girl they say can't make no children?" he asked, smiling like a man used to drawing blood with words. Towhand took one step forward. The man retreated like a scalded dog. But it wasn't until Dusty Boone arrived that the wind changed. He swaggered up, dust-coated, pipe in hand, wearing judgment like a second hat. "Well now," he said, grinning wide. "So the Comanche did marry the canyon girl after all. Thought that was just a ghost story." Towhand said nothing. Dusty turned to the gathering crowd, raising his voice slightly. "Married her proper, too. Shame she's got no seed. A house without a baby is like a rifle with no powder." Lila stood, heart thudding. But Towhand didn't move. His hands were still. The silence grew teeth. Someone chuckled. The preacher from the far end of the market spoke up, stroking his beard. "A barren woman," he said half-loud, "is an offense to divine design." Lila stepped forward. Towhand's arm lifted as if to stop her, but she touched his wrist gently. "I'm not broken," she said, voice soft but carried by wind and will. "I was born into a world where women are weighed by what they bear. I was thrown away for not bringing blood. But I lived." Murmurs rippled. "I've kept children alive that weren't mine. Fed mouths that would have gone quiet. I held my cousin's baby through sickness. I lit the fire that kept 3 lives warm while others just talked." She stepped past the stall now, facing them all. "I will not be measured by a womb. I will be measured by what I build, what I mend, and what I carry." No one laughed now. A young woman in the crowd, pale-haired and freckled, stepped forward and picked up one of Lila's shawls. "It's beautiful," she said. "I want it." Then another woman bought the second. And a man took the cloak. Towhand stood beside Lila. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. The preacher left in silence. Dusty Boone disappeared into the saloon. The trapper chewed his pipe and said nothing. Later, as the sun slipped behind the hills, they packed their wares, lighter than they came. They rode home with no words between them. But that night, as the fire curled around their cabin walls, and the world pressed no closer than the door, Lila reached for Towhand's hand. "I didn't speak for pride," she said. "I spoke because I'm done being silent where truth is owed." He nodded slowly. "The earth doesn't make noise when it shifts. But it moves mountains all the same." She leaned against him. The heartbeat she'd come to know so well was steady, like always. "I never thought I could matter without children," she whispered. "I thought I'd just survive until forgotten." Towhand brushed his fingers along her braid. "You weren't made to bear children," he said. "You were made to bear light." Tears welled, but she didn't turn from them. In that moment, something deeper than shame cracked inside her. And where it broke, something stronger grew. Later, they walked outside. The sky was full of stars. The air still held the chill of seasons past, but her hands didn't shake. Tohan placed a blanket on the porch. Saturday. She joined him. They watched the moon rise. He turned to her. "I don't need sons," he said. She tilted her head. "What do you need?" He touched her hand. Placed it over his chest. "This," he said. "And the fire you carry." She smiled, eyes glistening. And the last bit of snow, silent and stubborn, melted beneath her feet. The ground was soft. And ready. Like her. We measure women by what they give the world in flesh, never asking what they already gave in silence. But I remember Lila Whitebird, who was cast into snow and rose with fire in her hands. The world told her she was hollow, but the man who truly saw her knew better. So should we. Now, click the story on your screen. One even more stirring than this. It'll fill your soul and warm the places you thought forgotten. Click it now, and walk into the next fire.